say that it was Joe Matthews, the influence of Joe Matthews, who kept me in the church during those critical decision years, because he showed me a way that I could be in the church, effective or not. So I'm thankful for that. But I got to know Susan at that time, and she was becoming the Council of Directors, the Council of Ministries Director, which is a cabinet level position, and being elected to represent this conference hither and yon, including in the Northeast jurisdiction. And as one of those delegates at one of those meetings, she found herself elected bishop. And I remember at the time her saying how surprised she was. She'll probably tell you something about that this morning. But that was the wisdom of the church in action. And she's never looked back, serving the Philadelphia area and New York area. Anyway, her whole biography, not her whole biography, but a representative biography with her highlights is in the program, so I hope you'll give some attention to that. But at this point, I hope you'll give your attention to Bishop Susan Morrison. We drove over from Delaware this morning. You saw her. No, she was here, but she has to drive back to Delaware. So.
Well, grace and peace to the remnant.
And also to you.
Snowbound, but I hope spirit-led.
Absolutely.
I remember when I was assigned up in the New York, Vermont area, and talking about snow now, and I remember we were having a retreat of some leadership people on an Episcopal retreat center going out of Lake Champlain, and it started to snow. And before it was done, there were 8 inches of snow. And I, who had come from further south, the Philadelphia area, and had a sports car, by the way, at the time, was getting more nervous and more nervous and more nervous about the snow. And I'll never forget what one of my colleagues said to me that changed the whole lens on how I see snow. He said, "Bishop, relax. It's just God cleansing the earth. It's just God cleansing the earth." And it has made a difference ever since as I deal with snow. I feel like I'm in the middle of an EI Alumni Association meeting. You name a song and up you go and off you go and you're smiling, and I know behind that song you've got lots and lots of memories. I was connected, I'll say in a minute, a little bit to the EI. And I'm saying EI because that was my experience. I know the term has changed now. But it's been fun to watch you, especially as you talk about the old curmudgeon Joe Matthews. And someone starts a story, and it's like you all light up, and you all laugh, and you all know what that means. And that's a gift. It's a gift of community, but it's also a gift that Joe Matthews has brought in his leadership. My experience more is with Jim Matthews. You'll have to hang loose. You'll hear more about Jim than Joe today. Right. But that may be okay, so you may be more familiar with Joe. I especially remember what Bishop Felton May said about Joe and Jim Matthews on the first day of this event, when he said they're the modern day Charles and John Wesleys. I've always seen Jim Matthews and Eunice Matthews, and I want to say both of them. I call them the last of the royalty of United Methodism. They have been in places in the world, across cultures, across religious traditions. They have been with the major leaders in the world, again and again and again. And I don't think we'll ever see that kind of, at least in our Protestant tradition, entree and voice and presence that we've had, I don't want to say had, but what we've had with Jim and Eunice Matthews through the years. I'm sorry he's not here for me to say that to him. I'm proud to say that Jim and Eunice have been my parents in the faith, so I go back a long way with them. It seems appropriate that we gather to honor the Matthews brothers. For you who are United Methodists here, who are? Is there any of you? There's more than I thought. Okay. Bless you.
He's growing together under the rebel.
Well, I didn't. I like it. You may be aware of the latest institutional campaign. It's called Rethink Church. Besides a variety of promos, training events, and items that you can buy like sweatshirts and cups and shirts and whatever, there's a lot of promos going on at this time on television, and you may have seen them. It's called Rethink Church. The campaign's goal is to show people that those who are speaking spiritual meaning may find hope, may find it in the Methodist Church. It attempts to use out of the usual institutional models as a way to tell the church's story. Its attempt to be relevant today with especially folk who are outside the church or dissatisfied with the current one. Well, I'd like to say, hello? That's what the Matthews brothers have been doing their whole life and their whole ministry. Jim Matthews' story, you'll have to hang with me, most of them will be that. I remember a scene at one of our College of Bishops meetings. Jim, the oldest by far in the group of the College of Bishops. We were droning on about something. And all of a sudden, he spoke up. And I remember one of my colleague bishops turning to me, shaking his head and going, "Another fresh idea." I don't know how he continues to do so. It's an honor to participate in an event for both Jim and Joe because they both had a significant impact on my life and faith journey. I was, to use maybe a questionable label some places, a child of the 60s. If there was a protest movement about some injustice, at least I perceived was injustice, I was there. Through a wonderful campus ministry program, I began to connect a growing faith to social involvement. Evangelism became more than knowing and telling the story of Jesus. Jim Matthews put it well in a speech he gave at Boston University's School of Theology, where a chair of evangelism was named for him and Eunice, when he said, "Nowadays, the typical evangelist is so anxious to speak that he or she too quickly turns to the word of the gospel. But in the New Testament, all four of the evangelists do the opposite. They first speak of the deeds of Jesus, addressed to real human needs. But then it raises the question, why? And the Word of God then becomes relevant." Through my campus ministry experience and the deeds model of Jesus, there developed within me a strong sense of call to mission. There was a person coming that week to my campus from the Board of Missions, looking for young people for teams, an urban team in Brazil and a rural team for Bolivia. I applied and was accepted. It's an interesting story behind that, because in the application to go on the mission field in this youth program, it asked if you smoke or drink. It never asked if I was baptized or a church member. And when someone from the board came to ask me about my local church, which surely would want to support me in the mission field, I had to say, "I don't have one." "Well," he says, "surely wherever you are a local church," he said local Methodist church, "wherever church you go to, of course, they'll want to support you." I said, "I don't belong to one." "Well, where were you baptized?" "Well, I wasn't." And I remember he kind of got up and left. They've changed the application. But it's interesting how we get caught up and what we get caught up in so easily. At the missionary orientation, one of the key leaders was Joe Matthews. His presentations had a deep influence on the life and mission of our team in Brazil. He was a strong and articulate proponent, you know this, of needing community and having a common life together. The discipline of prayer, study, and action. There were 6 Americans on our team. And as soon as we got to Brazil, we knew we needed Brazilians on our team also. Throughout the experience, there were from 10 to 12 members of the Brazil team. I am convinced that the discipline of daily order made all the difference in the world for our ability as a diverse group of personalities, theologies, you name it, to be as effective as we were in Brazil. Our team ministry became a model for the Brazilian church and has been used in various areas of Brazil since. And Brazilian members of our team have provided significant leadership in the church through the years, including one who was named elected a bishop and another a seminary president. Also, as others have said, and you would say, the RS1 study program saved my faith and gave me a foundation to even deal with some of the seminary stuff. Say nothing about the charters. One story about the EI that I remember. Our training program that Joe Matthews led was at Stony Point in New York, where a lot of the missionaries' orientation takes place. But our team went to Chicago, to the EI, for about 5 days before we were sent overseas. I remember the picnic benches in the morning for breakfast with everybody else, a bowl of oranges and cold cereal. Interesting what you remember.
Yeah.
But the story I remember the most is the early morning, what I'll call crier, who moved from one door to the next, knocked on the door, and repeated the phrase, "Christ is risen." Any of you remember that?
Praise the Lord!
Praise the Lord.
Well, I just remember Christ. Hang loose with how I remember it.
Yeah.
One morning, however, knocks on my door, Christ is risen, goes to the next door, knocks real hard and says, "Christ is risen," and a voice from the room comes out and says, "The hell he has." I think the person wanted to sleep a little longer. I think that was the point. And it only dawned on me, actually more recently, is maybe that's where Jim Matthews has an incredible reputation that when he calls someone, it's at 6 o'clock in the morning. I can't tell you all the people who called at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I have a feeling that some of that may have started back there. The only other story I remember about Joe, he was kind of a gruff figure to me in the training we had. But I remember at Stony Point one time he was talking to a woman who was more from a conservative tradition, who was fussing and stewing about what was happening to the young people in the church and their dancing and all. And he looks at her and I remember he saying, "Oh man, all good Christians ought to know how to dance." I'm grateful for Joy's life and witness. I can't tell you the number of ecumenical settings I've been in, with leaders, bishops, or heads of other traditions and denominations. But when we got together, now it's my age range too, who haven't said the EI had a significant effect on their life and ministry, again and again and again. It's a gift that keeps giving. Jim Matthews has written, "A Christian is called to a life of holiness. A holiness not of escape, but engagement." I'm going to cut this down a little bit because of my voice, and it's morning, and I'm looking, and we'll see what we can do here with this. I was asked to speak on the book, Eternal Values in a World of Change, and to say something what's in the book. I now know you've gotten it. But I don't think it hurts for me to go through some of what it said, and I'll do it as briefly as I can, because we often talk about how a person has affected us or what they've done. But it wouldn't hurt us to understand what's behind why that person has acted the way they have. When I first got the manuscript, it was a Xerox copy. It had no date on it, but there was a young and dashing looking Jim Matthews on it, so I knew it was fairly old. So I Googled it, and it was back to being 50 years old. And what strikes me is how relevant that 50-year-old text is today. It's really a teaching model, and he uses a lot of stories and illustrations, and I will use those too as a way to tell what he thinks. He begins by talking about the shrinking world, that we can feel either compressed or confined, or we can reach out and embrace an even larger world. Then he tells a wonderful story about one of his daughters who went with him on a trip to South America. When she came back, her teacher said, "You can go, but you've got to do a report." You know that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So she wrote a report for class. And in it she said, "I found people friendly to me everywhere. They were only waiting to meet me so we could be friends." It's a quote that could serve us all well as we become more and more global citizens and find ourselves in situations of engagement with other cultures and other religions. They've been waiting to meet us so we could be friends. It'll preach.